that behavior gets reinforced, then you're more likely to do it in the future, right? It worked. So, and so we talk about that really specifically, like with a concerted effort in therapy, where we identify like, what are the behaviors? So one that comes up a lot in therapy is like issues of trust, right? And so that would be kind of an element of low agreeableness. Like you're sort of like are suspicious of other people. And you asked about environment, right? A lot of times that comes from, potentially being invalidated as a kid, like not getting your needs met. Could be like, especially in a romantic relationship, it could be that you just had like a really bad formative experience with the first partner. And now you're like really suspicious of other people. The only way to like learn that people are trustworthy is to like give them a chance. And so we really work on what that might look like. I don't usually ask for help. So maybe I'll ask somebody to pick me up from the airport. And that feels easier to me than like telling a new partner that, I had like I had been sexually assaulted and now I'm afraid like to get intimate. So I always cancel, so we sort of figure out like these levels of kind of working up the ladder of behavior change, kind of like what I described in my own journey that, kind of unfolded over years. It's still baby steps, but it's like more planful.
I find that really interesting when it comes to using positive reinforcement. Is it also the same when it's negative reinforcement? So when you make excuses in your head when you want to do something last minute and you're like, oh, I'll put it off because it saves me the stress of doing it in the moment.
So it can, yeah, right? So one of the things we really want to point out in therapy, and I broken record this with almost everybody that I work with, is the difference between long-term consequences and short-term consequences. So a lot of the things that we do to protect ourselves, like, I'm going to break up with you before you break up with me, right? Or I'm going to procrastinate, or I'm going to check the stove a million times. Like, all of those sort of make us feel better right now. So I'm feeling anxious that my partner's going to break up with me. So I sabotage the relationship basically, right? And so like, I'll leave you before you can hurt me. That is like, feels good in the moment. It's like relief, right? Okay, I don't have to worry about that anymore. And so what we always do is come back to the values. Well, you said you wanted a trusting, loving, like communicative partnership when we did our values. And so does that behavior take you closer or farther away from your values, from the life that you actually want? And so, yeah, like and another thing I'm always doing with clients in therapy is trying to validate how they're solving their problem, kind of on their own, right? Like people don't do things for no reason. So like when you break up with somebody to protect yourself from getting hurt in the future, like that's like functions for you, right? Maybe you've been hurt in the past and you're trying to protect yourself. So there's no like, oh my God, why are you doing that? It's like, yes, of course you're doing that. It makes perfect sense because of what happened to you in the past. But I wonder if those beliefs about trustworthiness are like outdated. This is a new relationship. Like, and the only way to figure it out is to try and like give this person an opportunity to show you. And then if they handle something small, then try another thing, right? Because you can't learn that you can trust people unless you give them a chance.
Right. And that's also, you're using gradual steps in the same way. Have you also felt with, your research and your clients over time, do you find that certain personality disorders or traits all stem from a similar trauma?
When we think about personality, well, so basically how I got into personality and changing personality is because I am like kind of like a mental health treatment researcher first and foremost. So basically like the gold standard for treating like different mental health conditions is to do like a manualized or sort of like a protocol, like a book. So there's like a different manual for panic versus, worry versus OCD versus depression versus eating disorders. And so if you're a therapist, it's a real pain to like know the ins and outs of every treatment. And if you're a patient, it also sucks because most people come to therapy with more than one condition. So like, oh, well, I have depression and social anxiety. What am I, but the manual's only for depression. So do I do the depression one first and then the social anxiety one and kind of prolong treatment? It just doesn't actually match what patients are experiencing. Another problem too is that like if you or any listeners have ever tried to like get high quality mental health care, like a lot of the places and the good providers have long wait lists or they don't take insurance. And so clinicians are busy. They don't have time to like in the 10 minutes in between session, be like, okay, what am I supposed to do in the generalized anxiety manual? So a lot of times we'll sort of revert to, okay, tell me about your week and I'll try to throw in skills, but we're not actually following the manual. So that's kind of like the general status of mental health care in the United States. At the same time that like treatment research is going on and that's kind of the status quo for treatment, a lot of other researchers that don't necessarily do treatment are interested in like what drives the expression of these different disorders. And so what we found over like decades of research is that there are these personality vulnerabilities that make a person susceptible to developing these disorders. People that are high in neuroticism, experiencing really strong negative emotions, those are the folks that tend to experience depression or anxiety, and different anxiety disorders, eating disorders. Some personality disorders like borderline personality disorder are really mitigated or mediated through neuroticism. Then we kind of talked about agreeableness, right? There's some that like disorders that look like really maladaptive agreeableness. That's like dependent personality disorder. Well, I'll go wherever you want to go. And where do you want to eat? And then there can be like sort of really low agreeableness, right? And that can look like mistrust. We see that in borderline personality disorder, people that have been hurt before. And then with disinhibition or conscientiousness, that's where we see like ADHD, we see like substance use disorders, like conditions that are a little bit more impulsive. And so the whole premise of like treating personality is like, instead of like playing whack-a-mole with all the symptoms of the disorders with a different manual, wouldn't it be easier if we just targeted the vulnerabilities? It'd be five treatments, right? Fewer treatments. It would like simultaneously address some of the difficulties that people are experiencing if they have more than one condition. That doesn't really answer your question about like shared experiences, but like there are these shared kind of personality features that put a person at risk to develop different disorders. I think the biggest challenge is that people have figured out a way to function that might not be functioning optimally, but I always use the expression with my clients, like the devil you know versus the devil you don't, right? So like, avoiding your emotions, which we see a lot in kind of like the neuroticism spectrum of disorders. And it looks different across different disorders. For like panic disorder, it looks like, if I start to feel panicky, I leave wherever I am, or I don't take the stairs because it'll lead me to be out of breath. In like generalized anxiety disorders, avoidance looks like, I have a thought about my kid away at college, like pop into my head. Well, I'm going to make myself feel better by calling and checking and asking for reassurance, right? In social anxiety, it might look like more straight up avoidance. Like I don't take classes with a public speaking component, or I don't go to parties. So that avoidance can look really different depending on like what the client is struggling with. But, kind of like the common thread is avoidance, right? It's either avoidance of negative emotions, or like, in the antagonism piece, it's like, with like trust, it's like, again, it's kind of avoidance of negative emotions, but it's like avoidance of like being vulnerable, putting yourself out there. And then with like disinhibition, with like substance use, anyone that's ever experienced a craving knows that they suck real bad and that it's really hard. And the only thing that's going to make that, what it feels like is the only thing that'll make that craving go away right now is if I drink or if I use. And so it's learning to kind of like tolerate that discomfort in the short term to do the hard thing. And so I think that's like the biggest challenge. They have to buy the premise of like, yes, it's working in the short term, but it is screwing you long term. And when people get that, then they are sort of willing. Then we sort of negotiate, well, how big of a step are you willing to take right now? Okay, well, not that. Well, what if we did it like this?
Hey guys, I would like to take a moment to introduce you to our app, Yoga Plus. You will have access to an incredible selection of videos led by top instructors in yoga, fitness, nutrition, and so much more. Download our Yoga Plus app, available on iOS and Android today.